Most people believe the police have been with us since the dawn of civilization, but this assumption is not true. In fact, the police force is a rather modern invention. For most of history, communities policed themselves through reputation, customs, and volunteered watchmen. These mechanisms, as simple as they may be, proved to be quite sufficient in regulating crimes. More interestingly, as cities grow and develop, we do not find a surging in crimes. What we do find are economic disparities, yes, but not a crime wave. This brings us to the question, if it was not a crime wave that sparked the creation of a police force, what did? More importantly, what is the guiding principle that dictates the course of this organization? Well, if you're a fan of history and criminal justice, stick around, for in this mini-series, we will cover the evolution of the police. Our story starts in Colonial America, a time where this country did not have a police force. Law enforcement was considered a local responsibility. Communities policed themselves using customs, reputation, and a night watch system. There were also sheriffs appointed by the local governor and constables elected by the people. Night watches were done by volunteers from the community, people who often dreaded the work but saw it as a duty. America gained its independence from Britain in 1776, and the newfound country did not want a police force. They instinctively knew that such an organization would inevitably become militarized and pose a threat to the community. This fear was especially pronounced because of the recent invasion and occupation by British forces. In fact, one of the reasons why policemen today wear blue uniforms is due to the dreaded red coats worn by the British Army. Anyway, as slavery became an increasingly lucrative business, night watch proved insufficient for the needs of America. A part of the population was subjugated as slaves, and to impose against the will of such a group requires a tremendous amount of energy. Many slaves were rebellious and often tried to escape. So in order to maintain order, a slave patrol system was instituted. I, patroller's name, do swear that I will as searcher for guns, swords, and other weapons among the slaves in my district, faithfully and as privately as I can, discharge the trust reposed in me as the law directs, to the best of my power, so help me God. Slave Patroller's Oath, North Carolina, 1828. The slave patrol system had three major purposes. 1. To chase down and return runaway slaves to their owner. 2. To deter slave revolts through organized terror. 3. To maintain discipline among slaves through patrols, random searches, and corporal punishments. It is known to historians that most white Americans did not own slaves. The slave-owning class were the wealthy 20%. What the slave patrol system did, however, is include poor and middle-class white Americans by making them complicit to the social hierarchy. Poor and working-class whites viewed blacks as not only their social inferior, but as a group that is to be disciplined. Furthermore, it created a strange fascination amongst patrollers with what African Americans were doing all the time, hence establishing a pattern of constantly watching, patrolling, and disciplining black men and women. As we all know, not all Americans were pro-slavery. Abolitionists vehemently opposed the practice, which culminated into the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history. After the Union Army won, the slave patrol system was no longer legal. This outlaw was insufficient, however, at halting a practice that had momentum from hundreds of years. The system of patrolling black communities, along with the terrorizing practices, would covertly sneak its way into the police department and other clandestine groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Nevertheless, post-Civil War Americans now had a different order. Its economical power was no longer defined by slavery, but industrialization. The period after the American Civil War is known as the Gilded Age. Citizens left rural areas and flocked to cities. America saw a rapid economic growth in this era, along with modernization such as railroads and Standard Oil. This age also created vast wealth disparities and horrendous work conditions. These economic disparities caused riots that would once again challenge the social order. The mercantile and industrial interests that now ruled America decided to develop means to maintain the status quo. Their answer to this problem is what we now know as the police. The first publicly funded, organized, full-time police force started in Boston in 1838. Boston was a large shipping center. Businessmen hired private security to protect their property and safeguard the transport of goods. These merchants devised a way of saving money by transferring their costs of security to the public. This was done by convincing politicians as well as the public that an institutionalized police force was necessary to keep the public safe in these rapidly growing cities. It is important to reiterate here that at no point did cities experience a crime epidemic that called for an institutionalized police force. Again, it was the desire of the mercantile interests to offload their private security costs onto the public that was the prime reason. Let's stop here to acknowledge what the purpose of the police is. The primary role of the police is to maintain social order. But what social order is depends on the period. In the 18th century, social order meant keeping slaves in check for their wealthy owners. Thus, we have the slave patrol system, which was a precursor of the police force. In the 19th century, social order meant keeping capital machinery safe and factory workers in line. The industrial interests had an image of the kinds of people most likely to go on strike and disrupt their lucrative production: poor European immigrants and people of color. The police's first duty was the crushing of labor riots, which they not only did well, but often violently. The ultimate irony is that several decades later, as the police were facing budget cuts due to low confidence from the public, policemen unionized, with New York City being the first police force to set the pattern in 1892. Police unions, like all unions, are designed to protect their own. But unlike other labor unions, police unions represent workers with the state-sanctioned powers to use deadly force. Imagine the amount of power this gives a cop. You have more job security than any other worker, on top of having the legal right to use deadly force. We will see how this combination plays out in later episodes, but for now, let's halt and recap. Colonial America did not have a police force. Communities policed themselves through customs, reputation, and a night watch system. As slavery became increasingly prominent, a precursor to the police force was established: the slave patrol system. This system was instituted to maintain the social order of slavery by capturing runaway slaves and crushing revolts. Once slavery was abolished after the Civil War, the long practices of patrolling black communities infiltrated itself into the police department and domestic terrorist groups like the KKK. The post-Civil War order was dominated by industrialists, a system which thrived on child labor, cheap factory workers, and the protection of capital assets workers used for production. The institutionalized police force was lobbied to politicians by mercantile interests and pushed to the public as a necessity for general safety. In reality, this offloaded the cost of security from private hands to public treasury. The police was therefore created as an institution to maintain social order, whatever that meant at the time. With police confidence being at an all-time low after the murder of George Floyd, it's important to state that the object here is not to denigrate the individual policeman. Like all things, the police as a whole has good and bad qualities. There are policemen who are heroes, and some who should not be wearing a badge. Our concern here is not to take sides, but to look at the system as a whole and its evolution over time. By understanding the evolution of the system, it will be clear why certain patterns repeat. And once you understand a pattern, you can break it. See you next time.